Welcome to Mystic Sleep Tales, a channel where timeless tales, gentle narration, and calming atmospheres help you drift off to sleep. Before we begin tonight's story, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Please share in the comments below. It's always wonderful to see our small community spreading across the globe. Now it's time to relax. Settle into your bed or your favorite armchair. Close your eyes. Take a slow, deep breath and let the day's fatigue wash away. Let my voice gently carry you to sleep, a place where imagination flows and dreams begin. Tonight, let's start with a simple act of breathing, not a place. Slowly draw air in through your nose. Hold it for a moment, and then release, letting it gently escape from your body as if dropping a feather into still air. Beautiful. Now do it again. Feel the weight of the pillow under your head or the softness of the cushion behind your back, and notice how your shoulders drop a little lower than you thought possible. There's nothing to do now. There's no work waiting at the door, no letter to answer before morning. The hours ahead are simply for rest, and you deserve every bit of it. Whatever's been on your mind today, those little worries that follow you from room to room, they're not relevant here. They can wait outside in the cold if they like, but they won't be brought in. This is your time, quiet and safe. Let the muscles behind your eyes soften. Let the corners of your mouth ease downward into their most natural position, neither smiling nor frowning, merely still. Feel the warmth of the covers around you or the familiar temperature of the room, and let yourself trust that warmth. Let it become the boundary of the world for a little while. The ceiling above, the floor below, the four walls around you, they are enough. They hold you in place as gently as a cupped hand holds a sleeping bird. There is nowhere else you need to be. And now, very slowly, I should like to take you somewhere. Not far, not to a place of excitement or wonder, but to a room. A small room in the English countryside on a winter afternoon in the time of Queen Victoria, where the light through the window is the color of old pewter, and the only sound is the soft, repeated brushing of wool across wooden paddles. It is a room you have perhaps never been to, and yet it will feel, I think, as though you have always known it, the way one sometimes knows a place in a dream before one has ever set foot inside. The room sits at the back of a stone cottage in the Cotswold hills of Gloucestershire, where the land rolls in broad green folds even in the coldest months, and the dry stone walls run along the ridges like sentences written across the earth. The cottage itself is built of that pale honey-colored limestone for which the region has long been known, each block cut and fitted by hands that understood how to make a house that would stand against the wind for centuries. The roof is of split stone tiles, heavy and gray, layered one upon another so that rain and snow slide down their surface and fall to the ground without ever finding a way inside. A thin trail of smoke rises from the chimney at the far end, barely visible against the white sky, and the front garden, if it can be called that, is no more than a strip of frozen earth bordered by a low wall where, in summer, foxglove and hollyhock might grow. But we are not going to the front garden, nor to the parlor, nor to the kitchen where a kettle may or may not be sitting over a bank fire. We are going to the carding room. It is through a narrow corridor at the rear of the cottage, past a door that has been left slightly open to allow warmth to travel from the hearth in the main room. And it is here, in this modest space, that the work of the afternoon is taking place. The room is perhaps 12 feet across and 10 feet deep, with a single window set into the far wall, its panes thick and slightly uneven, the kind of glass that bends the light just enough to make the world outside appear as though seen through water. The ceiling is low, the beams dark with age, and the floor is of wide oak boards that have been worn smooth by years of use, their grains standing up in pale ridges where softer wood has been trodden away. Along one wall, stacked upon a broad wooden shelf, are the fleeces. They have been washed already, though not with any great severity, for the woman who works here prefers to leave a trace of the natural lanolin in the fiber, finding that it makes the carding easier and the finished Rolags softer to the touch. The wool is from Cotswold sheep, the long-stapled, lustrous breed that has grazed these hills since the days of the Romans, and whose fleece carries a faint golden tint that no amount of washing will entirely remove. Each fleece has been folded and placed upon the shelf with care, the cut ends tucked inward, the locks hanging just slightly over the edge so that they may be drawn off one at a time without disturbing the rest. The color is not white, precisely, but a warm ivory, the shade of old parchment or of cream that has been left to sit in a china jug on a winter morning. Here and there a lock catches what little light the window provides and holds it for a moment, glowing faintly, as though the wool remembers something of the summer pastures from which it came. The scent of the room is particular and not unpleasant. It is the scent of clean wool, which is to say the scent of lanolin, faintly earthy, faintly sweet, carrying in it the ghost of open fields and rain-soaked grass. Beneath it there is the dry, quiet smell of the oak boards and the old plaster walls, and beneath that still the barest suggestion of wood smoke drifting in from the corridor. It is a layered fragrance, one that settles into the background of awareness and becomes, after a few minutes, indistinguishable from the room itself, as though the air and the walls and the wool have all agreed to share the same mild and agreeable character. In the center of the room, seated upon a low wooden stool that has been polished to a dark shine by years of use, is a woman. Her name is Mrs. Eleanor Haddon, and she has been carding wool in this room, or rooms very like it, for the better part of 30 years. She is not old, not in the way the word is sometimes used to suggest frailty or diminishment, but she is no longer young either. Her hair, which was once the color of chestnuts, is now threaded with gray and drawn back beneath a plain cotton cap. Her hands are broad and capable, the fingers slightly roughened at the tips from decades of contact with the wire teeth of the carding paddles, and her forearms, visible below the rolled sleeves of her linen blouse, are firm with the quiet strength that comes not from exertion, but from repetition, from doing the same careful motions day after day until the body learns them so thoroughly that the mind is no longer required to supervise. She holds a pair of hand carders, one in each hand. They are rectangular paddles, each about 8 inches long and 5 inches wide, made of smooth beech wood with leather-back card clothing fixed to their working faces. The card clothing is studded with hundreds of fine wire teeth, each one bent at a slight angle toward the handle, so that when the two paddles are drawn across one another, the teeth catch the wool fibers and pull them into alignment without tearing or breaking them. The handles are rounded and worn, shaped over time by the grip of her palms, and the wood is taken on a patina that no polish could replicate, a depth of color that comes only from being held, day after day, year after year, by the same pair of hands. She reaches toward the shelf without looking, her fingers finding a lock of wool by touch alone. She draws it away from the fleece with a gentle tug, not pulling but coaxing, the way one might ease a thread from a tangle, and the lock comes free in a single clean piece, perhaps 6 inches long, its fibers still holding together in the loose, natural order in which they grew upon the sheep. She turns it once in her fingers, examining it briefly, not with any particular concern, but simply from habit, the way a baker might glance at a loaf before slicing it, confirming what the hands already know. Then she lays the lock across the face of the left-hand carder, catching the cut ends on the wire teeth with a single motion of her index finger, and draws the fiber forward until it lies in a thin, even layer across the surface. And now the carding begins. She brings the right-hand carder down upon the left, not with force, but with a measured, gliding stroke, letting the wire teeth float across the surface of the wool without meshing deeply into the teeth below. The sound it makes is extraordinarily gentle, a soft, sustained whisper, like the sound of a palm brushing slowly across a folded blanket, or the sound of dry leaves stirring on a stone path when there is almost no wind at all. It is a sound that belongs to no particular note or pitch, a sound without edges, a sound that fills the room the way warmth fills it, evenly and without insistence. She draws the right carder across the left once, twice, 3 times, for each stroke covering a little more of the fiber than the last, working from the near edge toward the far edge in a sequence so practiced that it has the quality of breath, regular, unhurried, inevitable. With each pass, the fibers loosen from their natural arrangement and begin to lie in parallel, the tangles opening, the short end straightening, the whole mass growing lighter and more uniform as the air enters between the strands. The wool, which a moment ago was a compact lock with a definite shape, is becoming something else, something softer and more diffuse, a thin cloud of fiber held upon the face of the paddle like mist upon a hillside. She pauses, not because she needs to rest, but because the rhythm of the work includes pauses the way music includes silence, as part of its structure rather than as an interruption. She lifts the right carder and examines the wool on the left, tilting the paddle slightly toward the window so that the gray afternoon light falls across it. The fibers are nearly aligned now, lying in orderly rows like the grain of very fine wood, and the surface has a faint sheen to it, the natural luster of the Cotswold fleece catching what little brightness the day provides. She nods, almost imperceptibly, satisfied not with triumph, but with the simple recognition that things are as they should be. Now she turns the carders so that the handles face the same direction, teeth angled together rather than opposed, and draws them across one another once more. This is the stripping motion, the second stage of the process, and it transfers the fibers from one paddle to the other in a single smooth action, rolling them gently as they go, so that when she lifts the right carder away, the wool on the left has gathered itself into a soft, cylindrical form, a rolag, light as a breath, perhaps the thickness of her thumb and the length of the paddle. She eases it free from the wire teeth with her fingertips, lifting it away with the delicacy one might use to pick up a sleeping caterpillar from a leaf, and sets it down upon the wooden table beside her stool, where it joins a row of identical rolags, each one lying on its side like a small, pale log, each one containing within its airy structure the work of a few quiet minutes and the memory of a few quiet strokes. Beyond the window, the snow has begun to fall. Not heavily, not with any sense of urgency or accumulation, but lightly, in small, scattered flakes that drift more than they descend, moving sideways as often as downward, as though they have not yet decided where they wish to land. The sky is the same pale gray it has been all afternoon, a uniform sheet of cloud that gives no indication of depth or distance, and against it the snowflakes are visible only when they pass close to the glass, each one catching for an instant before continuing its slow, aimless journey toward the frozen ground. The hills beyond are barely discernible, their outlines softened by the falling snow until they resemble not so much hills as the suggestion of hills, a watercolor left out in the rain. Mrs. Haddon does not watch the snow. She is aware of it, as one is aware of a clock ticking in a familiar room, but does not draw her attention or alter her mood. Snow in the Cotswolds in winter is neither remarkable nor alarming. It comes, it settles for a day or a week, it melts, and the green returns. The sheep on the hillsides are accustomed to it. The dry stone walls are indifferent to it. The cottage, with its thick stone walls and its heavy roof tiles, has withstood worse than this for longer than anyone can remember. Snow is simply part of the season, like short days and long evenings, and a particular quality of light that makes everything, even the interior of a small carding room, appear as though it has been painted in shades of silver and cream. She reaches for another lock of wool. Her fingers find it without searching, and she draws it free with the same gentle tug, the same brief examination, the same calm placement upon the face of the left carder. The rhythm resumes. The soft brushing fills the room again, and the sound is so steady, so uniform, so entirely without variation that it begins to feel less like a sound and more like a quality of the air itself, a texture rather than noise, something one feels against the skin rather than hears with the ear. The fire in the main room, some distance down the corridor, shifts and settles with a faint creak of burning wood, and a thread of warmer air enters the carding room, carrying with it the scent of apple wood, for the Haddons burn apple wood when they can get it, preferring its mild, sweet smoke to the sharper smell of oak or ash. The warmth is not dramatic. The carding room is not a warm room by any measure that a person accustomed to modern comforts would recognize, but is not cold either. It is that particular temperature that old stone houses achieve in winter, a steady, even coolness that is somehow more comfortable than it sounds, because the walls themselves radiate a faint residual warmth from the fire on the other side, and the wool, piled high upon the shelf, acts as a kind of insulation, holding the room's modest heat inside like a blanket holding the warmth of a sleeping body. Mrs. Haddon's hands move. The paddles brush. The wool opens and aligns and gathers. A rolag forms, is lifted, is set beside the others. Another lock is drawn from the fleece. The process begins again. There is no hurry in any part of it, no sense that the work must be completed by a certain hour or that some external deadline is pressing upon the afternoon. The wool will be carded because it needs carding, and it will be done at the pace the wool itself requires, which is the pace of patience, the pace of hands that have learned not to rush. Outside, the snowflakes continue their slow descent. A robin, or perhaps a wren, settles for a moment upon the window ledge, its small body a dark accent against the white sky, its head turning once, twice, 3 times, and then it is gone, lifting away into the falling snow as silently as it arrived. Mrs. Haddon may have seen it, or she may not. Her eyes, when they're not attending to the wool, tend to rest upon the middle distance, focused upon nothing in particular, the gaze of a person whose thoughts are not troubling but simply present, drifting through the mind the way the snowflakes drift through the air, arriving and departing without effort or intention. The row of Rolags on the table is growing. Each one is a small accomplishment, though Mrs. Haddon would not use that word. She would say, if asked, that she was simply getting on with things the way one gets on with washing or with sweeping or with any of the 100 quiet tasks that make up the fabric of a day. The Rolags are destined for spinning, which she will do later in the week, sitting at the great wheel in the parlor with a candle at her elbow and the fire built up against the evening cold. But that is later. That is another afternoon, another rhythm, another kind of quietness. For now, there is only the carding, and the carding is enough. She shifts slightly on the stool, adjusting her posture without thinking, the way a sleeping person turns in the night, not waking, but simply finding a more comfortable position for the body to rest in while the work of dreaming continues. Her feet, in their sturdy leather shoes, are flat upon the floor, and her back is straight but not rigid, held in place by the habit of years rather than by any conscious effort. The stool beneath her has no back, no arms, nothing to lean upon, and yet she sits upon it as easily as if it were a cushioned chair, her balance maintained by the small, constant adjustments of muscles that have long since forgotten how to be anything other than steady. The afternoon deepens. It is difficult to say precisely when the light begins to change, because the change is so gradual, so incremental, that no single moment can be identified as the turning point. But somewhere between one Rolag and the next, the quality of the light in the room shifts from gray to a slightly warmer gray, as though the clouds above have thinned just enough to allow a suggestion of the setting sun to filter through, painting the room in tones of pale amber. The wool on the shelf catches this new light and holds it, and for a few minutes the fleeces seem almost to glow, their ivory surfaces deepen to the color of old honey, the famous golden tint of the Cotswold breed, showing itself at last like a secret told in a whisper. Mrs. Haddon notices this. She does not stop carding, does not alter her rhythm, but her eyes lift briefly to the shelf and then to the window, and something in her expression softens, a slight easing of the lines around her eyes, a faint relaxation of the mouth, the kind of change that another person, watching closely, might not even register, but that a careful observer would recognize as contentment or something very near it. The light will not last. In a few minutes the clouds will close again and the room will return to its uniform grayness, and the early winter dark will begin to gather in the corners. But for now, for this brief interval, the carding room is touched with gold, and the wool beneath her hand shines like something precious, and the world beyond the window, with its falling snow and its fading hills, seems very far away and very quiet and very much at peace. The moment passes, as such moments do, without announcement or ceremony. The clouds thicken again overhead. The pale amber drains from the room like water, finding its way through sand, and the familiar gray returns, settling back into place as though it had never left. Mrs. Haddon does not mark its departure. Her hands have continued their steady motion throughout, the right carder gliding across the left in that same unhurried rhythm, and the wool beneath the wire teeth goes on opening and aligning itself with the same patient obedience it has shown all afternoon. There is a particular quality to the silence in the carding room that deserves mention, not because it is remarkable, but precisely because it is not. It is the silence of a room in which a single, quiet activity has been taking place for a long time, a silence that has been shaped by the work rather than interrupted by it, the way a riverbed is shaped by the water that runs through it. The soft brushing of the Carters is part of this silence rather than a break in it. It belongs to the room the way the smell of lanolin belongs to the room, or the way the low ceiling and the dark beams belong to it, as a feature rather than an intrusion. If the brushing were to stop suddenly, the silence that remained would feel not fuller, but emptier, a silence with something missing from it, like a face without its familiar expression. Mrs. Haddon completes another rolag and sets it upon the table. She counts them sometimes, not from any particular need to know the number, but from the same mild, habitual impulse that leads a person to notice the time upon a clock, even when there is no appointment to keep. There are perhaps 14 rolags now, arranged in a loose row, each one resting upon its side, each one slightly different from the last in the way that handmade things are always slightly different, carrying within their shape the small, unconscious variations of the hand that made them. Some are a touch thicker at one end. Some have a slight curve, like a crescent moon seen from very far away. But all are light, all are even in density, and all contain within their soft, cylindrical forms the same careful alignment of fibers, the same trapped air, the same readiness to be drawn out into yarn when the time comes. She stretches her fingers. It is a small gesture, performed without thought, the way a cat stretches its paws after sitting still for a long while. She opens her hands wide, spreads the fingers apart, holds them there for a count of 3 or 4, and then closes them again, curling them back around the handles of the Carters with the easy familiarity of long acquaintance. Her knuckles are slightly enlarged, as is common among women who work with their hands in cold rooms through English winters, but there is no stiffness in their motion, no reluctance. The hands open and close with the same fluid ease they have always possessed, and the work resumes without any sense of having been interrupted. Outside, the snow continues. It has not increased, has not gathered itself into anything that might be called a storm or even a proper snowfall, but neither has it stopped. It remains what it has been since it began, a light, persistent scattering of flakes, each one descending at its own pace and by its own path, some drifting left, some right, some falling nearly straight down in the rare moments when the air is perfectly still. The ground beyond the window, which was dark brown and frozen when the afternoon began, is now dusted with white, a thin, uneven covering that follows the contours of the earth beneath it, thicker in the hollows where the flakes have gathered and thinner on the ridges where the wind, slight as it is, has swept them away. The dry stone wall at the edge of the garden has collected a line of snow along its top, a narrow white ribbon following every rise and dip of the stones, and the bare branches of the apple tree in the corner of the garden hold small accumulations in the crooks of their limbs, as though the tree were balancing something fragile and did not wish to move. The world is growing quieter. This is partly the effect of the snow itself, which absorbs sound the way cloth absorbs water, softening everything it touches until the sharp edges of the world are rounded and the distances between things seem both shorter and longer at once. But it is also the effect of the hour, the slow winding down of the winter afternoon, when the birds fall silent and the sheep on the distant hills settle into their evening stillness, and even the wind, which has been no more than a murmur all day, drops to nothing. In the summer, there would still be hours of light remaining, hours of bird song and the distant sound of carts on the road and the voices of children in the lane. But this is January, and the day has been short, and the world is preparing to fold itself into darkness with the same unhurried inevitability with which Mrs. Haddon's wool folds itself into Rolags. She reaches for another lock, and her fingers, moving along the edge of the fleece, encounter a section where the fibers have tangled slightly, matted together by the natural oils and by the pressure of storage. She does not pull at it. Instead, she takes the lock between her thumbs and forefingers and teases it apart with a series of small, patient motions, opening the tangle the way one might open a knot in a ribbon, not by forcing it, but by finding the places where the fibers are willing to separate and coaxing them gently in those directions. It takes perhaps a minute, perhaps a little longer, and when it is done, the lock lies across her palm in a clean, open fan of fibers, ready for the carder. This is the kind of work that cannot be hurried. The wool has its own nature, its own preferences, its own way of behaving, and Mrs. Haddon has spent enough years in its company to understand this. Some locks open easily, falling apart at the lightest touch, as though they have been waiting all along for the chance to separate. Others resist, holding their tangles close, and these must be approached with greater patience, greater gentleness, a willingness to work with the fiber rather than against it. She has known women who card as though they are in a race, pulling the wool apart with rough, impatient hands and dragging the carders across one another with a force that tears the fibers and produces Rolags that are lumpy and uneven and full of broken ends. She does not judge them for it. Everyone works as they must. But she has always preferred the slower way, the way that treats the wool as a collaborator rather than an adversary. And the Rolags that result from this approach are, she believes, the better for it, softer and more uniform, with a lightness that hold the air inside like a held breath. She lays the opened lock upon the carder and begins again. The brushing sound returns, that same sustained whisper, and the rhythm of the room reasserts itself as naturally as a heartbeat returning to its resting pace after a moment of stillness. 1, 2, 3, 4-stroke from near to far, each one covering a quarter more of the fiber than the last. Then the turn, the stripping motion, the gentle rolling of the fibers into their cylindrical form. Then the lifting, the setting down, the reaching for the next lock. It is a cycle, but not a monotonous one, for within its repetition there are countless small variations, adjustments of pressure and angle and speed that the hands make without consulting the mind, responding to the particular character of each lock, the particular tension of each fiber, the particular mood of the wool on this particular afternoon. There is a word for this kind of tension, though Mrs. Haddon would not know it and would not use it if she did. It is the attention of the body rather than the mind, the attention that a skilled carpenter gives to the grain of the wood beneath the plane, or that a gardener gives to the soil beneath the trowel, an awareness that operates below the level of conscious thought, and yet produces results of extraordinary precision and care. Her mind, meanwhile, is free to wander where it will, and it does wander, though not far and not urgently, passing through memories and impressions with the same unhurried drift as the snowflakes outside the window. She thinks, for a moment, of the sheep. Not any particular sheep, but the idea of them, the thought of those large, calm animals standing on the hillside in weather like this, their thick fleeces heavy with the cold, their breath making small clouds in the frozen air. She has never been a shepherd and has no particular sentiment about sheep as creatures. But she respects the fleece they carry, respects the work it represents on the part of the animal, the months of growth, the accumulation of fiber upon fiber, each one drawn from the grass and the water and the minerals of the Cotswold soil and spun within the animal's own body into something fine and strong and useful. When she cards a lock of wool, she is in some sense continuing a process that the sheep began, taking the raw material of the hillside and refining it, one step at a time, toward its final form. But the thought does not linger. Thoughts in the carding room do not linger. They arrive, they rest for a moment, they move on, replaced by other thoughts equally mild and equally transient. She thinks of the supper she will prepare later, a simple thing, bread and cheese, and perhaps a bowl of broth if there is time to warm it. She thinks of the candle she must trim in the parlor before the evening comes. She thinks, briefly, of a letter she received last week from her sister in Stroud, which contained news of a neighbor's new grandchild and a report on the price of flour at the market, and which ended with the hope that the weather would hold until February. These thoughts pass through her mind the way the wool passes through the carders, lightly, without resistance, leaving no mark behind. The fire shifts again in the other room, and this time the sound is accompanied by a faint pop, a pocket of sap in the apple wood releasing its moisture in a small, bright explosion. The sound reaches the carding room as little more than a suggestion, a distant punctuation in the long, unbroken sentence of the afternoon. Mrs. Haddon does not react to it. She has heard such sounds 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and they belong to the same category of familiar background as the ticking of the clock in the parlor or the creak of the cottage settling on its foundations on cold nights. They're the sounds of home, and home is not a place that requires vigilance. The row of Rolags has grown longer. There are 20 now, or near enough, and the section of fleece from which she has been drawing locks is noticeably diminished, the fibers at its edge thinning where they have been pulled away. She will need to unfold a new section soon, peeling back the next layer of the fleece to expose fresh wool. But not yet. There is still enough here for several more Rolags, and she is in no hurry to change what does not need changing. The rhythm is good. The wool is behaving well. The afternoon is holding its shape around her like water in a vessel, still and contained and without disturbance. She cards another lock. The sound continues. The snow continues. The light in the room continues its slow, almost imperceptible decline, the gray of early afternoon shading by degrees into the deeper gray of late afternoon, the objects in the room losing their crispness of outline and beginning to merge with the shadows that surround them. The Rolags on the table are still visible, their pale forms standing out against the dark wood, but the fleeces on the shelf have begun to recede into the gloom, their edges softening until they look less like folded wool and more like the idea of folded wool, a memory of whiteness in a room that is slowly filling with dusk. Mrs. Haddon does not light a candle. It is not yet dark enough for that, and she is a woman who has learned, over many years of careful economy, to use every last minute of natural light before resorting to the expense of tallow or the trouble of trimming a wick. Her eyes have adjusted to the dimness, as eyes always do when the change is gradual, and she can still see the wool clearly enough to card it, can still distinguish the aligned fibers from the tangled ones, can still judge by sight and touch when a rolag is ready to be lifted from the paddle. The work does not require bright light. It requires only enough to confirm what the hands already know, and the hands know a great deal. There is something worth saying about the temperature of wool beneath the fingers, for it is not what one might expect. Raw wool, even washed wool, is not cold to the touch, not in the way that metal is cold, or stone, or water drawn from a deep well. It has a warmth to it that is intrinsic to its nature, a warmth that comes not from any external source, but from the structure of the fiber itself, which is hollow, and which traps air within its core in the same way that a down feather traps air, creating a layer of insulation that preserves whatever heat it encounters. When Mrs. Haddon handles the wool, her fingers do not grow cold, even in a room that would, by any objective measure, be considered cool. The wool meets her touch with a mild, yielding warmth, as though it is greeting her. And this is one of the small, unspoken pleasures of the work, the feeling of something alive and responsive beneath the hands, something that gives back a measure of the warmth it receives. She finishes another rolag and sets it down. 22 now, or 23. She has lost count, and it does not matter. The rolags will be gathered up later and placed in a basket lined with clean linen, and the basket will be carried to the parlor, and the spinning will begin in its own time, at its own pace, with its own particular rhythm and its own particular silence. But that is later. For now, the rolags simply accumulate, one beside the next, each one a small, soft record of a few minutes passed in the company of the wool and the paddles and the gray afternoon light. The snow outside the window has grown slightly heavier, not dramatically so, not in any way that suggests a change in the weather's temperament, but the flakes are falling a little more thickly now, and the ground beyond the garden wall has whitened to the point where the frozen earth beneath is no longer visible. The dry stone wall wears a thicker cap of snow, and the apple tree, bare and dark against the white sky, holds its accumulations more prominently, each branch outlined in white as though drawn by a careful hand. The hills in the distance have disappeared entirely, swallowed by the falling snow and the low cloud, and the world has contracted to the size of the garden and the field beyond it and the near stretch of lane, everything else having been gently erased, set aside for the duration of the snowfall, like furniture covered with dust sheets in a house whose owner has gone away for the winter. The effect of this contraction is not unpleasant. It is, in fact, restful, the way it is restful to close the curtains on a bright day and sit in the dimness for a while, or to pull the bed covers up over one's ears and listen to the muffled sounds of the house from within the warm enclosure of the bed. The world outside has simplified itself. The complications of distance and horizon and the broad sweep of the landscape have been reduced to a small, manageable space, a garden, a wall, a tree, a few square yards of widening ground, and within that space there is nothing happening, nothing demanding attention, nothing requiring a response. There is only the snow, falling and falling and falling with the patience of something that is all the time in the world. Mrs. Haddon draws another lock from the fleece. This one is slightly longer than the others, 7 inches or so rather than 6, and the fibers at its tip have a faint curl to them, a natural wave that the Cotswold breed is known for, a gentle undulation that gives the finished yarn its characteristic springiness and resilience. She spreads the lock across the carder and begins the brushing strokes, and the curl and the fibers resist slightly at first, the wave wanting to hold its shape before yielding to the steady persuasion of the wire teeth and lying down in alignment with the rest. It is a negotiation. The clock in the parlor strikes the half hour. The sound reaches the carding room as a single, muted chime, softened by distance and by the intervening walls, arriving not as a summons, but as a gentle notification, a reminder that time is passing even here, even in this room where time seems to move so slowly that it might almost be standing still. Mrs. Haddon hears it and notes it and lets it go. 3:30 or 4:30, it makes no difference. The work will continue until the light fails, or until the wool runs out, or until her hands grow tired, and none of these things is imminent. The afternoon still has depth to it, even as it darkens, and the shelf still holds more fleece than she could card in a day, and her hands, those remarkable instruments of patience and precision, show no sign of weariness. She finishes the rolag and sets it in place. She reaches for the next lock. The cycle continues, the same as it has been all afternoon, the same as it will be tomorrow afternoon and the afternoon after that, a rhythm as reliable as the turning of the seasons and as quiet as the growth of grass. The brushing sound fills the room. The snow fills the window. The warmth from the distant fire fills the corridor and creeps by slow degrees into the carding room, mixing with the cool air that rises from the stone floor and creating a temperature that is neither warm nor cold, but simply comfortable, simply right, simply the way things are in a stone cottage in the Cotswolds on a winter afternoon when the snow is falling and the wool is being carded and the world outside has gone very still. And if you are listening to this, wherever you are, whatever room you're resting in tonight, perhaps you can feel something of that stillness reaching you, crossing the distance between Mrs. Haddon's afternoon and your own evening, traveling through time the way warmth travels through stone, slowly and steadily, and without any loss of gentleness. Perhaps the sound of the carder's brushing, that soft, repeated whisper, has found its way into the rhythm of your own breathing, so that each stroke of the paddle corresponds to an exhalation, each pause between strokes to the brief, suspended moment before the next breath is drawn. Perhaps the gray light of the carding room has mingled with the darkness behind your closed eyelids, creating a space that is neither fully dark nor fully lit, a twilight of the mind where thoughts grow soft and slow and formless. If that is so, then let it be. There is no need to follow the story any more closely than you wish. Mrs. Haddon will go on carding whether you are watching or not, and the snow will go on falling, and the fire will go on burning in the other room, sending its threads of warmth through the old stone walls. You are welcome to stay and watch, to listen to the brushing and the silence, or you are welcome to drift away, to let the rhythm carry you down and to sleep the way a slow current carries a leaf down a quiet stream. Either way, the room will be here. The wool will be here. The steady hands and the soft sound and the falling snow will be here, holding their place in the afternoon, asking nothing of you, offering nothing but the particular peace that comes from watching someone do something well and slowly and without any need for it to be anything other than exactly what it is. The next lock of wool comes free from the fleece with a sound so faint it is almost imagined, a soft, fibrous whisper, and Mrs. Haddon lays it across the carder and begins once more. The wire teeth catch the fibers. The paddles move. The rolag forms. The afternoon continues its long, slow descent toward evening, and the snow continues its long, slow descent toward the ground. And in the carding room, there is nothing but the work and the silence and the warmth and the wool and the deep, abiding stillness of a world that has nowhere to be and nothing to do, and all the time the world in which to do it. She pauses for a moment to brush a loose fiber from the sleeve of her blouse. It clings to the linen briefly, held there by the faint static charge that will sometimes carries in dry, cold air, before she lifts it away with a gentle pinch and drops it onto the growing pile of loose fibers that has accumulated on the floor beneath the shelf. This pile, too, is part of the process, the inevitable residue of carding, the short ends and broken strands and tiny fragments that the wire teeth separate from the longer fibers and release into the air, where they drift downward and settle upon the floorboards like the finest possible dusting of snow. Later, when the carding is finished for the day, she will sweep these remnants into a cloth and carry them outside, where the birds will find them and carry them away to line their nests, so that even the waste of the afternoon's work finds a purpose, a continuation, a place in the quiet economy of the countryside. The fleece on the shelf is diminishing. The section she has been working from is nearly exhausted now, only a few locks remaining at its edge, and she draws these out one by one, each one a little smaller than the last, the final fibers of the section thinning toward the fold where the next layer begins. She cards them with the same care she has given to every lock that preceded them, neither rushing to finish nor lingering over the work, simply maintaining the rhythm, the steady, unchanging rhythm that has governed the afternoon from its beginning. The last lock produces a rolag that is slightly thinner than the others, a little less substantial, but it is still even, still well formed, and she sets it in its place at the end of the row without any sense of dissatisfaction. Now she rises from the stool. The motion is slow and deliberate, her hands bracing briefly against her knees as she straightens, her back unfolding from its seated posture with the careful attention of someone who knows that the body, after an hour or more of stillness, prefers to be reminded of its full height by degrees rather than all at once. She stands for a moment, her weight shifting from one foot to the other, and then she turns to the shelf and unfolds the next section of the fleece, peeling it back the way one might peel back the page of a very large, very soft book, revealing beneath it a fresh expanse of wool, creamy and dense and untouched, its fibers still lying in the natural order in which they grew, the locks falling in gentle curves that follow the contour of the sheep's body. She runs her hand across the surface of the newly exposed wool, not to examine it, but simply to greet it, to feel its texture and temperature, to reacquaint herself with the particular character of this fleece, which she has been working with for several days now, and which she knows as well as she knows the feel of her own pillow or the weight of her own shawl. The wool responds to her touch with its customary warmth and softness, the fibers parting slightly beneath her fingers and then closing again behind them, like grass bending in a light breeze. She nods, a private gesture of acknowledgement, and sits back down upon the stool. The room has grown darker while she was standing. The change is noticeable now, the shadows in the corners having deepened from gray to a color that is approaching, though not yet reaching, true darkness. The window is still a rectangle of pale gray against the darker wall, and the snow beyond it is still visible, still falling, its whiteness standing out against the gathering dusk like scattered stars against a clouded sky. But the interior of the room has retreated into a gentler dimness, and the fleeces on the shelf have lost their definition entirely, becoming soft, pale shapes without clear boundaries, as though they are in the process of dissolving into the air around them. Mrs. Haddon draws a lock from the fresh section of the fleece. It comes free cleanly, the fibers well organized and free of tangles, and she lays it upon the carder with a single, practiced motion. The brushing begins again. The sound, if anything, seems louder in the gathering dark, not because it has actually increased in volume, but because the other sounds of the afternoon have diminished. The wind has dropped to nothing. The fire in the other room has settled into a steady, near-silent burn. The clock in the parlor ticks on, but its sound no longer reaches the carding room, muffled by the closing of some door or the thickening of the air. Only the brushing remains, that one continuous, gentle sound, filling the room the way a single candle flame fills a dark space, not banishing the silence, but giving it shape, giving it a center around which it can organize itself. And this is the heart of it, perhaps this moment when the day has narrowed to its simplest possible form. A woman in a room, wool on a paddle, the sound of brushing, snow at the window, warmth from a distant fire, the smell of lanolin and apple wood and old stone. These are the elements, and they are sufficient. They do not need to be supplemented with incident or complication or the arrival of an unexpected visitor at the door. They do not need to build toward anything or resolve into anything or point toward any meaning beyond themselves. They simply are the way a stone is, or a hill, or a sleeping child. They exist in the present moment, complete and self-contained, and the present moment is all that matters in the carding room, where the past is the last rolag set down upon the table, and the future is the next lock drawn from the fleece, and everything between is the steady, patient, beautiful work of the hands. Mrs. Haddon cards. The wool opens. The fibers align. The rolag forms. She lifts it and sets it down and reaches for the next lock and begins again. The snow falls. The room darkens. The afternoon, which has been long and quiet and full of nothing but itself, continues its slow passage toward evening, and the only measure of its progress is the growing row of rolags on the table. Each one a soft, pale witness to the minutes that have passed, each one holding within its airy structure the warmth of the hands that made it and the patience of the afternoon in which it was made and the faint, lingering scent of the Cotswold hills in winter when the sheep stand quiet on the frozen ground and the snow falls softly upon everything and the world is so still that you can almost hear it breathing. She is nearing the end of the afternoon now, though the word "end" suggests something more definite than what is actually taking place. There is no clear boundary between the working hours and the resting hours in Mrs. Haddon's day. No bell that sounds, no clock that dictates when the carders must be set down. The transition happens gradually, the way dusk happens, one shade of gray giving way to the next until at some unmarked point the eye can no longer distinguish the fibers on the paddle from the shadows around them, and the hands, still willing, are gently overruled by the simple fact that there is no longer enough light to work by. That point has not yet arrived, but it is approaching. The window has become a softer rectangle now, its edges blurring into the dark wall around it, and the snow beyond the glass, which was visible earlier as individual flakes against the pale sky, has become a general whiteness, a luminous curtain drawn across the landscape, without any discernible pattern or movement. The snow has accumulated further. The garden wall has vanished beneath it, or very nearly, only the topmost stones still visible as a faint, dark line beneath the white. The apple tree stands like a figure in a dream, its branches heavy and still, its outlines softened by the snow that clings to every surface, and the ground between the cottage and the wall is a smooth, unbroken expanse of white, unmarked by any footprint or any track, as pristine as a page upon which nothing has yet been written. Mrs. Haddon draws what may be the last lock of the afternoon from the fleece. She does not announce this intention, not even to herself. She simply draws the lock and lays it upon the carder and begins the brushing strokes. And there is nothing in the pace or pressure of her movements to suggest that this rolag will be any different from the ones that preceded it. The wire teeth catch the fibers. The paddles glide. The wool opens and aligns. The sound fills the room, that same soft, steady whisper, unchanged from the first stroke of the afternoon to what may be the last, as constant as breathing, as reliable as the turning of the earth. But there is a quality to this final carding, if final it proves to be, that is worth attending to. It is the quality of completeness, of a thing being done as well as it can be done, not because the outcome matters more than usual, but because the doing of it matters. The simple, physical act of drawing one surface across another with the right amount of pressure and the right amount of care. Mrs. Haddon does not think in these terms. She does not step back from her work and admire it or congratulate herself upon its quality. She simply does what she has always done, what her hands know how to do. And the result is a rolag that is indistinguishable from all the others, soft and even and light, a small cylinder of aligned fibers that holds its shape upon the table with a modest assurance of something that has been made correctly and knows it. She lifts it from the carder. She sets it at the end of the row. She rests the paddles upon her knees, face up, the wire teeth catching the last of the window's dim light, and she sits for a moment in the near darkness, not moving, not reaching for another lock, simply sitting. Her breath, which has been so quiet all afternoon that it was inaudible even to herself, becomes briefly noticeable in the stillness, a slow, even rhythm that matches, or perhaps is always matched, the rhythm of the carding, breath and brushstroke sharing the same unhurried tempo, the same patient cadence. The room is very dark now. The fleeces on the shelf are no longer visible as individual shapes, but only as a general paleness along the wall, a faint suggestion of whiteness in the gloom. The rolags on the table have similarly receded, their forms discernible more by memory than by sight, the eye knowing where they are because the hand put them there rather than because the eye can actually see them. Only the window retains any real light, a soft, gray-white glow that comes not from the sky, which is dark, but from the snow itself, which reflects back into the air whatever faint illumination remains, creating a luminescence that has no source and casts no shadow, a light that seems to rise from the ground rather than fall from above. Mrs. Haddon, after a time, she rises. Again the motion is slow, the body unfolding by degrees, and this time she places the carders upon the table beside the rolags, setting them down with the same care she would give to any tool she respects, the handles aligned, the wire faces turned inward so that the teeth will not catch on anything during the night. She brushes a few loose fibers from her apron and straightens the cotton cap upon her head, tucking a strand of gray hair behind her ear with a gesture so automatic that she is not aware of having made it. Then she turns to the table and begins to gather the Rolags. She picks them up one by one, not in handfuls, but individually, each one lifted between her thumb and forefinger with the same delicacy she used to remove them from the carders. They are so light that the act of picking them up is barely an act at all, more suggestion than a grip, the fingers closing around the soft cylinder with just enough pressure to hold it, and no more. She places each Rolag into a basket that sits on the floor beside the table, a shallow wicker basket lined with a square of clean linen. And as the basket fills, the Rolags settle against one another like sleeping animals, their pale forms nestling together in a loose, comfortable arrangement that requires no ordering and no adjustment. When the last Rolag has been placed in the basket, she covers them with the corners of the linen cloth, folding it over gently so that the wool is enclosed but not compressed, protected from dust and from the small creatures that sometimes find their way into a stone cottage in winter, the mice that live behind the skirting board and the moths that appear from nowhere on mild evenings. The cloth is plain and white and very clean, and when it has been folded into place, the basket looks like a small, soft bed, the kind a child might make for a doll, snug and warm and entirely suited to its purpose. She picks up the basket by its handles and carries it out of the carding room, pausing in the doorway to look back. The room is dark now, truly dark, the window the only source of light, and even that is fading as the last of the winter twilight withdraws from the sky. The shelf with its fleeces is a shadow among shadows. The stool, the table, the floor with its fine dusting of loose fibers, all have been absorbed into the general darkness, their outlines lost, their surfaces invisible. Only the smell remains, that same mild, complex, agreeable scent of lanolin and wood and stone, unchanged by the departure of the light, as constant in the dark as it was in the gray afternoon. Mrs. Haddon turns away and walks down the corridor toward the main room, the basket held before her at waist height, her steps unhurried and sure despite the dimness. The corridor is narrow and the walls close on either side, and her feet find their way by the memory of 1,000 previous journeys rather than by sight. The floor changes beneath her from the wide oak boards of the carding room to the flagstones of the corridor, the texture shifting from smooth to slightly rough, the temperature dropping for a moment as she passes through the coolest part of the house before rising again as she approaches the main room, where the fire has been burning all afternoon and the air is several degrees warmer than anywhere else in the cottage. She enters the room, and the change is immediate. The fire, which has settled into a bed of deep red embers beneath a single remaining log of apple wood, casts a low, warm glow across the flagstone floor and up the whitewashed walls, creating a sphere of amber light that extends perhaps 10 feet from the hearth before giving way to shadow. The room is not large, but it feels spacious after the closeness of the carding room. The ceiling higher, the walls further apart, the air warmer and drier, and carrying a stronger scent of wood smoke. A table stands near the fire, its surface marked with the ordinary evidence of daily life, a candlestick, a folded newspaper, a teacup and saucer, a pair of spectacles in a leather case. 2 chairs face the hearth, one a straight-backed wooden chair with a cushion on its seat, the other a broader, softer chair with arms, the kind that invites sitting and then makes it difficult to leave. She sets the basket of Rolags beside the spinning wheel in the corner of the room, placing it on the floor where it will be ready when she needs it, and then she moves to the fire and kneels before it, reaching for the poker that hangs from an iron hook set into the stone of the chimney breast. She stirs the embers with a few gentle strokes, turning the log so that a fresh surface is exposed to the heat, and after a moment a small flame appears, tentative at first, then growing, curling around the underside of the log and casting a brighter light into the room. The shadows retreat. The walls glow warmer. The temperature, which had been merely comfortable, edges towards something that might almost be called warm. She rises from the hearth and moves to the window that faces the front of the cottage. Drawing aside the curtain, which is a heavy piece of dark wool, she looks out at the lane and the fields beyond. The snow has covered everything. The lane is a smooth white ribbon between the stone walls of the neighboring cottages, unmarked by wheel or hoof or foot. The fields beyond are a broad, pale expanse stretching toward the invisible hills, their usual patchwork of green and brown and gray, erased by the uniform white of the snow. There is no movement anywhere, no person walking, no carte approaching, no animal stirring in the lane or the garden or the field. The world has been stilled as thoroughly and as gently as the fibers in a rolag have been stilled by the action of the carders, every element lying quietly in its place, aligned and orderly and at rest. She lets the curtain fall and turns back to the room. The fire is burning more strongly now, the fresh surface of a log catching well, and the light in the room has increased enough to see clearly by. The table and the chairs and the spinning wheel and the basket of Rolags all restored to their familiar solidity. She moves to the table and picks up the candlestick, a simple brass holder with a half-burned tallow candle in its cup, and carries it to the fire, tilting it until the wick catches a flame from the hearth. The candle flickers, steadies, burns, adding its small, bright contribution to the light in the room, and she carries it back to the table and sets it down, the flame reflecting in the surface of the teacup and casting a warm, golden circle across the folded newspaper. She sits down in the broader of the two chairs, the one with arms, and draws a shawl from the back of it over her shoulders. The shawl is knitted from Cotswold wool, the same breed she has been carding all afternoon, and it is soft and heavy and warm, its stitches close and even, the work of her own hands from a winter 2 or 3 years past. She pulls it close around her and settles into the chair, and the chair receives her with the accommodating sigh of old upholstery and well-sprung cushions, adjusting to her shape the way it has adjusted to her shape 1,000 times before. For a moment she sits quite still, looking at the fire. The flames are low and steady, moving with the unhurried fluidity of something that has no destination and no deadline, curling around the log, and then releasing, curling and releasing, an endless, hypnotic cycle of advance and retreat that has occupied the human gaze since the first fire was kindled in the first hearth in the first dwelling ever built. The embers beneath the flames glow a deep, even red, and the ash at the edges of the hearth is a fine, pale gray, the same color as the sky was this afternoon before the snow began, and beneath the sound of the burning there is no sound at all, only the vast, enveloping silence of a cottage in the countryside on a winter evening when the snow has stopped the world. For the snow has stopped. She cannot say precisely when it ceased, whether it was while she was gathering the Rolags or carrying the basket down the corridor or kneeling before the fire. But when she looked out of the window a few moments ago, the air was clear, the flakes no longer falling, the sky overhead perhaps a shade or two darker than before, the clouds beginning to thin at their edges were the first faint intimation of starlight might, in an hour or so, begin to show. The snow that has already fallen lies undisturbed upon the ground, and the stillness that follows a snowfall, that particular crystalline stillness in which every sound is muffled and every surface is new, has settled over the cottage and the garden and the lane and the fields beyond. Mrs. Haddon feels this stillness. She feels it in the weight of the shawl upon her shoulders and the warmth of the fire upon her face and the deep, settled comfort of the chair beneath her. She feels it in her hands, which lie quiet in her lap, the fingers loosely curled, the palms upward, the muscles at rest after their long afternoon of steady, patient work. She feels it in her breathing, which is slowed to a rhythm so gentle that it is barely distinguishable from stillness itself, each breath drawn in like a long, slow wave approaching a shore and released like the same wave withdrawing, the interval between them a small eternity of calm. She will sit here for a while before she rises to prepare the evening meal. She will sit and watch the fire and listen to the silence and feel the shawl upon her shoulders and think of nothing at all or of everything at once, the way one does at the end of a long, productive, quiet day when the work is done and the evening has arrived and there is nothing left to do but rest. The Rolags in the basket will wait. The fleeces on the shelf in the darkened carding room will wait. The spinning wheel, with its great rim and its smooth-worn treadle, will wait. Everything will wait, because everything can wait, because there is no urgency in any part of this life, no pressing need that cannot be met tomorrow or the day after that, with the same steady patience and the same quiet skill that Mrs. Haddon brings to everything she does. The fire burns. The candle flickers. The shawl holds its warmth. The cottage stands solid and still beneath its cap of snow, its stone walls holding the cold outside and the warmth inside, its small rooms full of the objects and the scents and the sounds that make up a life, a pair of Carters on a table, a basket of Rolags lined with linen, a shelf of pale fleeces in a darkened room, a spinning wheel waiting in a corner, a fire of apple wood burning low in a hearth of Cotswold stone. These are small things. They're ordinary things, but they are enough. And perhaps, if you have been listening, they are enough for you as well. Perhaps the rhythm of the carding, that soft, repeated brushing that has been with us through the length of this afternoon, has found its way into the rhythm of your own rest, so that even now, as the story grows quieter and the room grows darker and the fire grows lower, you can still feel it somewhere beneath the surface of your awareness, a gentle pulse, a slow cadence, a steady heartbeat of wool and wood and silence. Perhaps the snow that fell outside Mrs. Haddon's window is falling now behind your closed eyes, each flake a thought dissolving, each flake a care releasing, each flake a small surrender to the kindness of the dark. Perhaps the warmth of a shawl upon her shoulders is the warmth of your own covers, drawn close around you, holding you in place the way the cottage holds the fire, gently and securely and without any need for words. If that is so, then rest now. Rest the way the wool rests in the basket, soft and still and ready. Rest the way the snow rests upon the ground, quiet and complete and asking nothing. Rest the way Mrs. Haddon rests in her chair by the fire, with the work of the day behind her and the peace of the evening all around her, knowing that everything that needed to be done has been done, and done well, and done with care, and that tomorrow will bring its own work and its own rhythms and its own quiet satisfactions. But tomorrow is not yet, and tonight is for sleeping. Thank you, very gently, for being here. It has been a pleasure to sit with you in the carding room this evening and to share the quietness of Mrs. Haddon's afternoon. If this story has helped you find a little rest, a little peace, a little distance from the day, then it has done all it was meant to do. Should you feel moved to leave a quiet word in the comments below, know that it will be received with gratitude. And if you have not yet joined this small community, you are warmly welcome to do so that the next time we meet in a place like this, a stone cottage, a winter afternoon, a room full of wool and silence, you will find the door already open and the fire already lit and a chair already waiting just for you. Sleep well. Sleep softly. Good night.